What we're talking about on this video is we're going to talk about the marketplace. We're talking about the seller dashboard, and we're going into GDPR and privacy and compliance issues with regards to the seller dashboard. So that could be a number of different things. That could be I'm collecting information in the dashboard. I have information in the dashboard. I'm part of a marketplace and I'm leaving as a seller and I don't want them to have any more of my information. So I want them to flush my information. What kind of compliancy issues? How do I know they're compliant? If I'm selling medical devices, how do I know that they're maintaining compliance? How do I know that they have a privacy statement and are not reselling my seller information as a seller? So those are just some of the thoughts around GDPR and privacy. Chris, why don't you dive in and introduce some of the technical aspects of that and anything else that you want to add into what compliance issues and privacy issues there are?
Absolutely. Thanks, Ron. And this is a really interesting one because as you scale up your marketplace and or depending on where you start operating your marketplace platform, you're going to need to comply with not just GDPR, but general privacy requirements and regulations. I'm sure a lot of folks will be familiar as well with the California Consumer Privacy Act and other similar acts that have come around that really represent similar requirements. They're not exactly the same, but they're similar. And just sort of some foundational pieces that you'll want to keep in mind is from a legal perspective, there's a big consequence here. So you might be saying, why do I care about this? That's probably one of the main reasons. The other thing is from a user perspective, there's just a trust level whenever you present the user with, this is what we're using on the site. This is what we're collecting on the site. This is how we're using it. And you have the option to opt out. From a sort of foundational perspective, that's what these privacy and compliance pieces are substantially about. Again, there is some variation and we won't go into the entire detail here just so that we can, maintain a good cadence. But in general, what we're talking about is this concept of privacy. And a lot of this, Ron, came around because a lot of advertisers started collecting incredibly detailed information that in some scenarios was offensive. It became a privacy issue. And ultimately, you have private companies with a lot more information about people than folks really believed or understood or expected. And then that's getting monetized and shared throughout networks of advertisers.
Yeah.
And so the objective here isn't, to eliminate that tracking and analytics. It's to notify the users and give them a choice. So the consequences are that you could be facing massive penalties and fines if you don't comply with the different jurisdictions that you're operating in. And you might say, well, if I'm operating a marketplace, how do I know if I'm, in that marketplace or not? You kind of have to restrict people from executing and operating your platform in that jurisdiction, aka country or state, etc. In order to prevent yourself from being legally liable. We are not legal experts. You want to refer to your legal counsel here, but ultimately the point is that just as a general thought, you could be facing millions and millions of dollars, if not more, in fines for not complying with GDPR, CCPA, and other regulations. Okay. So what from a technical perspective is really applicable here is that your platform has to be able to function. Ideally, it still needs to be able to function if someone opts out. And so there's a lot of nuance to that depending on how your marketplace application is architected and built. Is it capable of being sort of resilient to the fact that people are going to opt out of certain aspects? And then will it also be able to be effective? So not just function, but still be effective. And is it straightforward for users to be able to opt back in? Are they going to be able to see what they lose and gain by not participating? What kind of messaging are we going to provide? And so that's where this dashboard really comes into place. And this is pretty interesting, Ron, because one of the things that I would say here is depending on how much of the functionality you want to leverage of offering sellers their ability an ability to embed the catalog from the marketplace, from their products into their own website, or have their own subdomain or their own, white label branded domain, but it's using your marketplace platform to drive it. Well, these are scenarios where GDPR and other privacy regulation settings will need to sort of propagate into those environments. So the seller is going to need to be able to say where they're operating, whether or not they want to turn on GDPR. In many cases, the marketplace, you as the marketplace owner or operator, you may want to offer them different customization of the messaging even. So you might want to offer them different templates for how they're going to present that to their end customers whenever they navigate to that store. And then, similarly, we may need to, based on the locations that they're operating in for that marketplace seller, or other distinctions, be able to determine if we need to show a buyer, someone who's potentially a buyer, if we need to show them a GDPR message, because, hey, this location for this seller means they are actually, they have to comply with this jurisdiction's GDPR and privacy rules. So those are some of the nuances, Ron. I think it's really something that you want to be asking yourself, like, is your marketplace e-commerce platform thinking about this? Is it something that, is off the shelf available? And how customizable is it so that it will match my scenario? And how deep does it go? Is it just a really flimsy, brittle sort of, functionality? Or is it something that's well thought out and ingrained into this overall architecture of the software?
Yeah, I agree with that. And you might be a hybrid, right? As you were kind of saying there a second ago, it gave me a thought. Whereas, let's say you and I were both going to go to this marketplace and we're going to sell our wares, and you're a personal trainer, and I'm selling whatever, it doesn't really matter, Amazon Echoes or something. I'm selling some device. So when you and I sign up as sellers, there may be an agreement that we have to sign when we sign up as a seller that says we all as sellers agree to not resell any information gathered on the platform, right? So they already carte blanche help save us and save the consumers from us sellers turning around and monetizing the information that they're getting for us so that we can sell our wares, right? Even if they give us our own branded store. On the other hand, my clients may not want me to bombard them. Even though they bought one device from me, they want to opt out of any other notifications from me. But from you as a personal trainer, part of your service is the constant communication. They're actually buying a plan from you where they have to sign up and have this constant communication back and forth. And so your consumers, your clients are going to have a very different level of sign up and engagement with you than mine are, selling wares that don't want to be spammed, because once they buy the one unit, that's all they want. I'm just giving them a good deal. They want to be gone and they want me to forget about them. Your consumers don't, because part of the engagement of you being their trainer is to monitor their progress and constantly send them reports and challenge them with new exercises, things like that, right? So even in a hybrid environment, part of what you were saying about giving those sellers that flexibility to be able to have in their own stores their own configurations. Anything you want to add to that, or should we move on to now the notifications?
I think that was great. Let's dive into some notifications.
Great. So we just kind of talked about a few of them with my example about you, right? Now we have ongoing notifications. So there's all kinds of notifications. Now, right now, we're talking specifically the notifications within the seller dashboard. So this could be notifications that I want to ensure my consumers of my products, or in your case as a personal trainer, your ongoing services, we want to make sure that our clients can sign up. It could be from a seller dashboard perspective, what our consumers can sign up as a consumer of our services. Hey guys, thanks for watching the video. Just want to take a quick break and remind you we've got some free technical resources for you linked down in the description. Thanks for watching again. Let's get back to the video. So go ahead and dive into notifications and talk a little bit about, and if you have to go into our platform, I mean, you can talk generically if you want, but you can go into our platform and talk about all the different kinds of configurations that we offer and what a platform should offer as far as both functionality, extensibility to extend into SMS modules, scheduling, HIPAA compliant messaging notifications. How do we deal with HIPAA content in messaging, where you have to have an internal messaging subsystem, but then the texting goes in and lets you know that there's a secure message in the platform, things like that.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ron. And yeah, the notifications are really, really a hidden treasure if you really want to sort of like look at often overlooked but very potent and powerful opportunities, within the marketplace space. And sort of to start out with, one of the things that we want to sort of present here in general is this concept of modalities, like you just mentioned, Ron. Basically, sending messages internal to the marketplace application. This is very important to be able to sort of show like a little icon or indicator that, hey, you've got a message, but that isn't overly aggressive in your face. Depending on the scenario, if it's an auction or something like that, maybe it needs to be configurable, but with a default of being more persistent or higher frequency of reminder. If there's a auction expiring, for example, or an item on your watch list that's down to a low inventory count, for example. But in general, the modality of being internal to the platform could also extend to a mobile application or a tablet device. And so this is a very pervasive way to communicate with your marketplace buyers and sellers, is through these notifications. Now, think about the actual seller and their ability to reach some of their buyers within the platform itself. This is really, really powerful because if you sort of think about it, like pretty much almost all of, and substantially all of the advertising that goes on out there, especially with B2B and really B2C, is connecting the sellers to the buyers. Really that simple. And you have that already. You are offering that within your marketplace. But the question is how well are you delivering on that value? Because you have the value, it's sort of like, it's intrinsic to the nature of the situation. You have the potential energy, if you will. But are you actually turning that into results? Are you turning that into kinetic energy? And so how do you actually do that? Well, with these notifications, believe it or not, it is it's free essentially once you set up the workflows. And it's just like governance that we talk about a lot. Internal notifications within the platform itself can be extremely powerful and they don't cost anything. So you set up these notifications for different scenarios, and I'll sort of elaborate on some of the common ones that are high payoff in a moment. But it's really low cost, essentially. There's just an upfront sort of time to configure. And depending on the platform run, these are already in the platform and quite opinionated based on data and feedback on what works well. Now, the other modalities like you were talking about would include email as well as texting. And of course, there are other formats too. Those are sort of some of the more standard formats that typically make sense. It's possible to have a phone call generated using AI to call and, provide a notification, for example. And again, there really are a lot of other options, but the general modalities are in platform, email, text, maybe phone call after that.
And video chat, potentially. We see a lot of that now, right?
Yeah, that's another option. Yeah. So like an automated video chat. And so sort of the other piece of this is like hitting the sweet spot. And what do I mean by this? Well, we all know that there's sort of like an intuitiveness that we look for with any company that we're collaborating with, that we're working with, that they're providing a service to us or a product. We want them to, at the limit, read our minds. Now, I don't think anybody expects them to genuinely read our minds, but it's kind of like, hey, you've worked with these customers like me before, and you're gathering data on us, and you have this feedback loop. Like, I expect you to get this thing completely optimized to the point where my scenario, as long as it's fairly standard, should be accounted for. It should be self-service, if not completely automated. And at the limit, that's your requirement to be successful within your niche or niches in your marketplace. Whether or not you know it or not, that is the reality. And so the notifications are a key part of this, aren't they? I mean, think about it. You sort of have a standard process, but then notifications can help you with managing expectations. We received your order. The seller received your order. The seller has acknowledged your order and is working on fulfillment. The seller has put your item into shipment and here's the tracking info. I mean, that basic information is so foundationally critical. And if it doesn't go out in a self-service automated way, you're failing your buyer and you're failing your seller. But it extends a lot further beyond that. Some of the other aspects are going to include things like, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Seller, we haven't seen you add new products into this category in a while, and this is a hot category. We recommend that you consider, adding products like this that are working. We've sort of like sanitized the data and normalized it so that it's, de-identified from all of our sellers. And we've normalized it and we're showing that these categories are high profit margin and you're not fully taking advantage of this. We recommend taking a look at it. Man, that is so valuable as a seller to get that notification. Oh my gosh, I forgot. I need to list these items. And then it's like, oh, here's a link to be able to go through the listing process. Are you manually uploading? Are you using our integrations? How are you going to get your data into our system? Do you want to use our concierge service? And so the notifications can be a really powerful re-engagement, both for buyers and sellers. We all know about getting recommendations or, hey, you left these items in your cart. Here's a bonus to re-engage, etc. And one of the big pieces about this is not just the modalities, but also the sort of frequency and even business logic. So how often by default and in what modality, in platform, email, or text, and how often, what frequency. So this might be like every 30 minutes or right after something happens or once a week or once a month. Like how often do they get different types of notifications? These are all things that should be opinionated from the beginning based on role or persona. And then the user should be able to customize them based on their preferences. And generally speaking, we want to be at sort of like the fine point of not being too annoying, but being assertive enough that we're getting their attention and keeping them engaged without bothering them, right? And it should be sort of, again, like at the limit, reading their mind for what they want. Now, this is really interesting because as you sort of get into the different notification types, Ron, there's a lot that you can do here with sellers to help them engage with their buyers. So in the context of a marketplace, it's even more powerful because there's so much that we can do. Like we can send a seller a notification that says, hey, this buyer just got this from you, but buyers like this are also getting these other things typically, and you're not putting those in your store. We recommend that you add those to your store so that you can sell those too. Or for the buyer, hey, you got this from the seller, but a lot of their buyers that buy things from them also get these accessories or support plans or whatever. We recommend you get those. It can also be informational. A lot of times what you want to do with the marketplace is really build a community around niche areas that you are the best in. And so this is a really powerful method for marketing that just beats competitors hands down. If you build a community, a lot of times the trust and credibility that you have as a marketplace within that niche will supersede some of the shortcomings and, lack of complete optimization in other areas of your business. And
Right.
so people will tend to flock to you because of that. And so that's something you can use notifications for as well, is to sort of weave in this additional value of the community and how people are interacting, maybe answering each other's questions, having some gamification around that, getting sellers and buyers to interact in a productive way. The list really goes on here. And the point is how is your marketplace going to be, through the next 3 to 5 years, delivering more value than your competitors? And how are you going to sort of like take the potential energy that's there with your marketplace and the data that you're getting and turn it into kinetic energy? How are you going to realize that potential for your buyers and sellers?
Yeah. And there's even one more aspect, and I agree with everything that you've said. And all of that is extremely important because that's what's going to literally drive the business. So, the one additional aspect, and one of the ways that I always look at it, is the protection side of the business. Why, when I go to eBay, why is there a button on every product that says contact the seller? Why? Why can't I just have the seller's email address printed right there and I click and I can just email them directly? How come it always has contact the seller? Well, it's a security thing, right? I invested all the money in the platform. I paid the money for the platform. I built the platform. I brought the sellers. I brought the buyers together. I don't want the buyers to go contact the sellers outside of my platform and negotiate a better deal or do something and me miss out on the commission when I'm the one that invested in the entire platform, built the entire business, and brought them together. So the reason why not only do we automate and make the platform and make the notifications and add all this value and build that trust is we want them to come back and use our platform. When a buyer comes back and says, contact the seller, we're not going to give up the seller's email address or location. We're going to use our platform, and then we're going to notify the seller that they have a question from a buyer, and then they're going to go into our platform and answer them back so we can monitor that communication and protect our investment as well, right? So there's that security side of how can we control privacy if we don't keep them in our platform and we don't control the communication, right? So we talked a lot about the buyer-seller communication throughout that. Was there anything else we wanted to add about buyer-seller communication? I know you talked about the frequency, you talked about the modalities, we talked about some of the scenarios, right? Sellers asking a question pre-buy, right? Sellers asking a question post-buy. Seller to the consumer is offering 20% off a warranty now that they've bought it, and or offering white glove concierge service to help set up their NordiTrack after they bought it 2 days later to make sure they got it up and running. If not, here's a video. If you need additional help for $49.95, our team can fire up a video call with you, watch you set it up, and walk you through the setup process. All those kinds of additional things that buyers and sellers can communicate with each other can be within your platform to build that trust Chris talked about. Anything else you want to add on about the buyer and seller communication?
Yeah, I think this is a really key piece. And I agree with what you were talking about there, the trust between them and the security. And, foundationally, this is an area where the fidelity of that communication and sort of like the intelligence that's built in and sort of like guardrails and opinionated interaction that you can drive is going to massively improve the quality that your buyers and ultimately your buyers receive, your sellers are able to deliver. And I'll go through a few examples here. Whenever a seller has the option to have a buyer request a quote, a lot of times this could sort of become a very open-ended, subjective process. However, if you force in a opinionated and, sort of like only opinionated where it's necessary way, then you can force the seller to comply with at least answering certain questions within a certain set of guidelines. And this can be as simple as having them select from a set of dropdowns where you have opinionatedly determined certain values. And, in many cases, you're going to want to have flexibility for them to say other and insert a value. But generally speaking, the more opinionated you are with something like a quote, with providing a lead time and providing terms that the seller is checking off, that if they say that the lead time is X and it ends up being X times 2, there are consequences for that. And they're going to sign off on those terms. Similarly, for the buyer, whenever the quote goes out, if the buyer can receive from the seller, because they've sort of gone through a standardized process, maybe there's some customization that the seller can do here, where they can put their own proposal template in, or they can add links to external resources and, collateral or whatever. But there are standard fields that they have to fill out. it makes it easy for the buyer to compare different quotes. If there's some level of sort of commitment that the seller has to make, this also dramatically improves the sort of just consistency that the buyer is going to have with determining which seller they're going to work with. And probably one of the most important things here, Ron, is whenever buyers and sellers are communicating, there has to be some level, some sense of consequence and justice, if you will, if there are any issues in those interactions. Now, the other thing that I would say is foundationally, in addition to sort of governance and rules that are going to govern this, we also want to just generally make suggestions and best practices available. So like one of the things that's become really prevalent now is like chat AI and just general, like just basic like auditing of things. And so before the seller sends a message to the buyer, we can say, hey, it looks like you're saying something like this. Would you like to, respond with this template and then tweak it? And that can be really helpful as well. Similarly for the buyer, maybe the buyer needs to find a certain option whenever they're communicating between the buyer and seller, and they haven't considered these three things that are commonly coming up. So we'll suggest to the buyer, hey, you should probably ask about this, or, this seller has had issues with this. Did you ask about this and confirm that you're comfortable? Things like that. So this can be pretty advanced, but the main thing here is that there's some thought put into and some opinionated nature based on the category or niche for that communication, so that it matches the ideal scenario for what information will be shared and that is consistent. Because think about it, the sellers and buyers are going to be coming from different scenarios, and if your sellers have a consistency with their interaction with the buyers, the buyers are going to have a much better experience.